The gunshot echoed through crystal chandeliers before anyone could scream. Victoria Sterling watched the assassin's weapon swing toward her chest with the slow-motion clarity of someone about to die. 3 months of marriage flashed through her mind, the contract, the distance, the careful pretense. 1 second left, then movement. Her husband, the quiet maintenance worker she'd wed to satisfy her father's inheritance clause, became liquid shadow. His hand caught the gunman's wrist and twisted. Bone cracked loud enough to puncture the orchestra's sudden sense. Armed guards collapsed around them as Garrett Brennan positioned himself between Victoria and the chaos-gray eyes colder than winter steel. She'd married a ghost with a trigger finger. 3 months earlier, the problems had been simpler. The boardroom on Sterling Defense's 47th floor smelled like expensive leather and barely concealed ambition. Victoria stood at the mahogany table's head, while 11 men watched her with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. Manhattan spread below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, a kingdom of glass towers that technically belonged to her if she could keep it. Harold Pierce leaned back in his chair, jowls quivering with indignation. The 62-year-old CFO had worked with her father since the company's founding 3 decades ago. That history apparently gave him permission to question everything. His voice carried across the silence. "You're married. To whom?" Victoria kept her spine straight, shoulders back. Power was 90% posture and 10% not letting them see you sweat. "His name is Garrett Brennan. We were married 3 days ago in a private ceremony." Margaret Stone, the general counsel, stopped her metronomic pen tapping. The woman's expression suggested she was already calculating liability implications. "Your father's will explicitly states you must be married before your 32nd birthday to maintain controlling interest in the company. That deadline was yesterday." "Was yesterday?" Victoria repeated, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Which is why I'm married. The terms of the inheritance have been satisfied. My lawyers filed the necessary documentation with probate court this morning." Harold's face achieved an alarming shade of purple. The color clashed with his silver tie. "You're telling us that you found someone, courted them, and married them in what, less than a week? Forgive me, Miss Sterling, but that strains credulity." The use of Miss instead of Mrs. wasn't accidental. Victoria noted it, filed it away for future reference. "I don't recall asking for your forgiveness, Mr. Pierce, or requiring your belief. I'm informing you of a legal fact, nothing more." Thomas Whitmore cut in before Harold could explode. The VP of Operations had a politician's smile and a snake's instincts far more dangerous than Pierce's blunt hostility. "We have a right to know who this man is. After all, as your husband, he'll have certain access to you, to company information. Surely you understand our concern." Victoria had anticipated this angle. She'd prepared for every question, every attack vector. What she hadn't prepared for was the knot of something uncomfortable that twisted in her stomach when Whitmore said husband. Because Garrett Brennan wasn't really her husband. Not in any way that mattered. "Mr. Brennan has signed an extensive prenuptial agreement. He has no stake in Sterling Defense, no access to proprietary information, and no interest in my business affairs. This is a personal matter that satisfies a legal requirement, that's all." "Then why marry him at all?" Harold's voice carried genuine confusion beneath the anger. "Why not find someone more suitable, someone from our circles, someone with connections, someone you could control?" Victoria let the words hang in the air. "How transparent of you, Mr. Pierce." The CFO sputtered. Before he could formulate a response, the boardroom door opened. Every head turned. Garrett Brennan pushed a cleaning cart into the room, eyes downcast, posture apologetic. He wore the standard maintenance uniform, gray shirt, darker gray pants, both slightly too large. A baseball cap shadowed his face. He moved with the careful invisibility of someone who'd learned to go unnoticed in spaces where he didn't belong. "Sorry." His voice was quiet, Texas accent softening the vowels. "Thought the room was empty. I'll come back." Victoria's pulse kicked up a notch. This wasn't planned. Garrett wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to reveal himself like this, but perhaps his timing was perfect. "Mr. Brennan." Her voice stopped him mid-retreat. Actually, your timing is excellent. Everyone, I'd like you to meet my husband. The silence that followed could have shattered diamonds. Garrett's head came up slowly, and for just a fraction of a second, Victoria saw something flicker in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. Then it vanished, replaced by a carefully neutral expression that gave away nothing at all. "Ma'am." He kept his tone respectful, uncertain. "You sure about this?" "Quite sure." Margaret's mouth had fallen open. Thomas Whitmore looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Harold Pierce made a sound somewhere between a cough and a dying walrus. "This is a joke." Harold's voice cracked on the last word. "This has to be a joke. You married the help. I married a man who asked for nothing, expected nothing, and signed papers that guarantee him nothing." Victoria's voice cut through the rising chaos, which makes him considerably more trustworthy than anyone in this room. Garrett remained motionless by the door, hands loose at his sides. To anyone watching, he looked uncomfortable, a working-class man caught in a world he didn't understand. But Victoria had learned to read the subtle tells in the 3 weeks since their first conversation. The way his weight distributed on the balls of his feet, the slight angle of his shoulders that kept both the door and windows in his peripheral vision, the calculated stillness that could explode into motion without warning. He wasn't uncomfortable. He was ready for what she still wasn't entirely sure. Thomas found his voice, first politician's training overriding his shock. "Victoria, I understand you were in a difficult position with the inheritance deadline. But this farce undermines everything your father built. The optics alone will show that I value integrity over appearances." She gathered her papers, signaling the meeting's end. "My father understood that even if you don't." "This discussion is over, gentlemen. Miss Stone, my personal life is not company business." The board erupted into arguments and accusations as she walked toward the door. Garrett stepped aside to let her pass, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the performance they'd just delivered, perhaps. Or simply two co-conspirators recognizing each other across a divide of secrets. "Ma'am," he said again, softer this time. "Mr. Brennan." She nodded once, crisp and professional, then swept from the room. Behind her, the board's voices rose in pitch and fury. She ignored them all. They would fall in line eventually. They had no choice. Her father had been many things, most of them complicated, but his will had been airtight. Marry before 32 or lose everything to a foundation that would dismember the company piece by piece. She'd satisfied the terms. That was all that mattered, even if satisfying them had required proposing marriage to a janitor. She'd met exactly twice before their courthouse wedding. 3 weeks earlier, the desperation had tasted different. Victoria's office was always empty after midnight. She preferred it that way, no assistants hovering, no board members dropping by with quick questions that ate up hours. Just her, the city lights, and the endless scroll of financial projections that determined whether Sterling Defense survived its next quarter. Her father had built an empire on military contracts and cutting-edge defense systems. Then he died 6 months ago suddenly and without warning, leaving her with a company she'd spent her whole life preparing to lead and a will that seemed designed to destroy her. The cleaning cart's approach barely registered. She'd trained herself not to hear the maintenance staff. They were background noise, part of the building's infrastructure. Invisible. But this one stopped and watched the financial news on her wall-mounted screen. Victoria looked up sharply, irritation flaring. The man in gray stood beside the conference table at her office's far end, methodically wiping down the surface. His attention, however, was fixed on Bloomberg's coverage of Southeast Asian currency markets. "You follow the markets?" The question came out more curious than accusatory. He glanced at her, seemingly surprised she was still there. His eyes were gray, unusual, striking. They held an intelligence that didn't match the baggy uniform. "Sometimes." The single word carried weight. Not dismissive, not apologetic. Just measured. Victoria closed her laptop slowly, attention fully engaged now. What do you think of Sterling Defense's Q3 projections? Most people would have deflected. Most people working night maintenance wouldn't have an opinion on quarterly earnings reports, let alone projections that weren't public. She expected him to shrug, to retreat into the safety of not knowing. Instead, he paused, set down his cloth, looked at her directly. I think you're overextended in Malaysia. Currency fluctuations are going to hit harder than your analysts expect. The baht's unstable. Victoria's fingers stopped moving on her keyboard. The Southeast Asian expansion was classified, or as classified as corporate strategy could be. The projections weren't public. The Kuala Lumpur facility was barely more than blueprints and NDAs. How do you know about Malaysia? I read. He shrugged, the gesture somehow making him seem both humble and evasive. And people leave papers lying around. You'd be surprised what maintenance sees. It was a reasonable explanation. It was also exactly what someone with training in intelligence gathering would say. Victoria studied him more carefully. Maybe 35, 36. Lean in a way that suggested endurance rather than gym workouts. The kind of build that came from functional strength, not aesthetic goals. His face was unremarkable at first glance, the sort that disappeared into crowds. But those eyes held depths that made her reconsider everything about him. What's your name? Garrett Brennan. How long have you worked here, Mr. Brennan? 8 months, give or take. 8 months. Right around the time her father's health started declining. Right when things at Sterling Defense began to feel off. Nothing she could point to directly, just a sense that pieces were moving on a board she couldn't see. Victoria made a decision that would have seemed insane if examined too closely, but desperation did strange things to risk assessment. I have a problem. Most people do. I need to get married in 3 weeks, and I don't have time to find someone I can trust not to destroy my life in the process. Garrett Brennan went very still. The cloth in his hand stopped moving. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral, giving away nothing. That's an unusual problem. I have an unusual life. Victoria stood, moved closer. Power dynamics mattered, and she needed to see his face clearly. My father's will requires marriage before I turn 32, which happens in exactly 22 days. If I'm not married by then, I lose controlling interest in this company to a board of vultures who will tear it apart for spare parts. She watched for his reaction. Most men would have shown surprise, calculation, greed. Garrett Brennan showed none of those things. He simply processed, like someone running tactical assessments. And you're proposing what exactly? Exactly what I said. Courthouse wedding, prenuptial agreement, we live separately, we see each other at carefully staged public events. After a reasonable interval, say 2 years, we divorce quietly. You walk away with a settlement large enough to disappear permanently if that's what you want. Why me? Because everyone else I could ask would want something I'm not willing to give. Power, position, access, you just want to be left alone. That makes you perfect. Garrett was silent for a long moment. His gaze flicked to something on his cleaning cart, just a fraction of a second. But Victoria caught it. When he looked back, something in his eyes had changed. Not softened exactly, but shifted into a different configuration of calculation and weariness. One condition. Name it. I have a daughter. Lily, she's 6. Her mother passed away 4 years ago. His voice roughened slightly on those words. As far as Lily's concerned, this has to be real. I won't lie to my daughter about why I'm marrying someone. And if anything threatens her, anything at all, the deal's off. I don't care about your company or your inheritance. She comes first. Victoria felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Not quite respect, not quite sympathy. Something closer to recognition, one parent protecting their child in a world that didn't make it easy. I wouldn't expect anything less. She extended her hand across the space between them, closing the distance. A business deal, nothing more. Garrett looked at her hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm, controlled, and carried faint calluses that had nothing to do with pushing brooms or emptying trash bins. We have a deal, Miss Sterling. Mrs. Brennan, technically, as of 3 weeks from now. Neither of them smiled. There was nothing happy about the arrangement they'd just made, just two people trapped by circumstances making the best of impossible choices. Victoria had no way of knowing in that moment that she'd just shaken hands with one of the most dangerous men in the world. A ghost who'd spent 15 years hunting enemies in places that didn't exist, executing missions that would never be acknowledged, and building a body count that would have kept her awake at night if she'd known the numbers. All she knew was that she'd found someone to marry who wanted nothing from her except to be left alone. It seemed at the time like the perfect solution. The wedding was 8 minutes of bureaucracy. Manhattan Courthouse, Thursday afternoon. A judge who performed 50 ceremonies a week. 2 witnesses pulled from the hallway, paralegal students who earned $50 each for their signatures. Victoria wore a gray Armani suit. Garrett wore a black suit that fit him surprisingly well despite looking cheap. They repeated words, signed papers, accepted a certificate that transformed their arrangement into legal reality. No kiss, just a firm handshake that felt more like closing a business transaction than beginning a marriage. The prenuptial agreement had taken longer than the ceremony, 47 pages detailing exactly how little Garrett would receive. He'd read every page, signed without negotiation. His daughter wasn't mentioned in the paperwork. That had been Victoria's call. Whatever happened between them, Lily stayed protected. 3 months later, the arrangement had settled into routine. The penthouse at Columbus Circle offered 4,500 square feet of careful separation. Garrett and Lily occupied the West Wing, 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and enough space to maintain their own rhythm. Victoria kept the master suite and home office in the East. They crossed paths 2 or 3 times weekly, usually in the kitchen or elevator. Polite, distant, exactly as agreed, except for the reading. It started week 6. Victoria worked late. Returned home to find Lily crying because her father was stuck at work, which meant whatever Garrett actually did during the hours he wasn't pushing a cleaning cart. Patricia Walsh, the 65-year-old neighbor from the 32nd floor, had been babysitting. She looked frazzled. Victoria found herself in Lily's room with a book about wild things and a 6-year-old who looked at her like she'd hung the moon just for showing up. The reading became ritual. Most nights Victoria made it home by 7:30. Lily would appear with whatever story had captured her imagination that week. The child had her father's gray eyes but lighter hair blonde where Garrett's was dark. She called Victoria the princess who runs the tall building for the first month. Then one night, unprompted, she'd asked if she could call her something else. Like what? Victoria had been genuinely curious. Maybe V, like a superhero. The nickname stuck. And then a week later, Lily had tried out Mama V with the kind of tentative hope that could break hearts. Victoria hadn't corrected her. Now 3 months into the arrangement, she sat at the kitchen island watching Garrett repair the penthouse's reverse osmosis water filtration system. He'd disassembled the whole unit, cleaned the membrane filter, and reassembled everything in under 20 minutes. His movements were efficient, practiced the work of someone who understood industrial systems far beyond what a maintenance worker should know. You're very good at that. Garrett glanced up from threading the last connection. His hands were clean despite the work. He'd washed them twice during the process. Used to do a lot of different things before cleaning offices, such as nothing interesting. The deflection was smooth, practiced. He stood, tested the water flow, nodded with satisfaction. But it pays to be versatile. Victoria wanted to push, to demand real answers about who Garrett Brennan actually was beneath the uniform and evasions. But their agreement didn't include interrogation rights. They were business partners wearing wedding rings, nothing more. Except that Lily called her Mama V now. And Garrett had started leaving coffee ready in the mornings, exactly how Victoria liked it. Details he shouldn't know, couldn't know unless he'd been paying attention in ways their arrangement didn't require. Small things, meaningless things, that somehow felt like they mattered more than the signatures on their marriage certificate. Later that week, Harold Pierce's private investigator delivered his report, 15 pages of careful documentation that concluded with a single damning paragraph: Garrett Brennan's history existed for exactly 8 months and 12 days. Before that, nothing. No driver's license, no bank accounts, no tax records. As if he'd been created from thin air. Victoria read the report twice, filed it away, said nothing. Because whatever Garrett was hiding, whoever he'd been before becoming a janitor who married CEOs for inheritance clauses, one thing had become clear over 3 months of careful observation: he wasn't a threat to her. If anything, she was starting to suspect he might be the only person in her life she could actually trust, which was either the smartest instinct she'd ever followed or the stupidest mistake she'd ever make. The security breach came on a Tuesday. Victoria was reviewing Malaysian facility contracts when her phone lit up with James Fletcher's name. The head of security never called after 11 unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "We have a situation." His voice carried the kind of controlled tension that made her pulse spike. "Define situation." "Someone accessed Shadow Archive, encrypted files we didn't even know existed. The access codes were current. But my father's been dead for 6 months. Victoria was already moving, grabbing her jacket, heading for the private elevator, which means someone either copied his codes or has been sitting on them waiting for the right moment. "Yes, ma'am. We're trying to trace the terminal location now, but whoever did this knew what they were doing. They bounced the access through 6 different servers before—" "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Lock down the system. No one in or out of those files until I arrive, and James, don't trust anyone in IT. This came from inside." She hung up, mind racing through implications and possibilities. Her father had always been paranoid about security, compartmentalizing information to an almost obsessive degree. The existence of files she didn't know about shouldn't surprise her. But someone accessing them now, 6 months after his death, suggested either opportunity or desperation. Neither option was comforting. The penthouse was dark except for the kitchen light. Garrett sat at the island reading something on his ancient Nokia, not a smartphone she'd noticed, but an old model flip phone that probably couldn't access the internet. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression must have telegraphed urgency. "Problem at work. Security breach. Someone accessed classified files." Victoria paused, weighing her next words. The smart move was to say nothing, keep her business separate from their arrangement. But something about the way Garrett watched her, alert, assessing, ready, made her deviate from smart. "You know about the Malaysia operations. You know about Southeast Asian projections. You know things a maintenance worker shouldn't know." "Yes." No denial, no deflection, just acknowledgement. "What did you do before this? Before cleaning offices and marrying CEOs for inheritance clauses?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight, the heaviness of truths he couldn't fully share. "Different things, for different reasons that seemed right at the time." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not, but it's all I can give you right now." Victoria studied him. This man she'd married, this stranger who lived in her home and read to her daughter and knew classified information he shouldn't. Every instinct screamed that Garrett Brennan was hiding something massive, but those same instincts also insisted he wasn't the one who'd breached her company's security. "I have to go to the office. Someone just accessed my father's encrypted files." Something shifted in Garrett's posture. Not obviously, but she'd learned to read his micro-expressions over 3 months of proximity. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way his weight redistributed almost imperceptibly. "How classified? I don't even know. That's the problem. These are files my father apparently kept from everyone, including me. Then whoever accessed them wanted something specific, something important enough to risk exposure." Garrett stood, and for the first time since their wedding, he moved with purpose that had nothing to do with maintenance work or domestic routine. "Let me come with you." "Why?" "Because someone who knows enough to access files that well hidden knows things they shouldn't, and people with that kind of knowledge tend to be dangerous when cornered." The statement was too specific, too tactical. Normal civilians didn't think in terms of exposure risk and cornered threats. But Victoria was already moving toward the elevator, and having Garrett along suddenly felt less like weakness and more like strategy. "Fine. but stay out of the way." His mouth quirked, not quite a smile, but close. "I'm good at staying out of the way." The lie was smooth enough that Victoria almost believed it. Sterling Defense Tower at midnight felt like a mausoleum. The lobby's usual bustle had been replaced by skeletal security and the hollow echo of their footsteps on marble floors. James Fletcher met them at the executive elevator, his expression tight with stress. The former NYPD detective was 45, solid competent. Right now, he looked like someone who'd just discovered his job was harder than advertised. "Ms. Sterling?" His gaze flicked to Garrett with visible confusion. "Mr. Brennan. Update." Victoria kept moving toward the elevator, forcing James to follow. "Terminal 47B sub-basement maintenance area. Access originated at 9:47 p.m. Someone used a keycard registered to Thomas Walsh, supervisor, who died 3 months ago and sat at the terminal for exactly 18 minutes. Camera footage. Grainy but clear enough." James pulled out a tablet as they entered the elevator. The footage showed a figure in gray maintenance coveralls, face carefully angled away from camera's movements, suggesting familiarity with security coverage. Professional-grade tradecraft. Victoria felt Garrett lean closer, his focus sharpening on the screen. When he spoke, his voice carried a different quality, analytical, clinical. "That's not Hunt and Peck typing, that's someone with serious technical training." And they never looked up, never checked for cameras. They already knew where the blind spots were. James stared at him. Victoria kept her expression neutral. Garrett used to work different jobs, before maintenance. It was the thinnest explanation possible, but James accepted it with the weary pragmatism of someone who had bigger problems than unusual janitors. The elevator opened onto the 14th floor, where server rooms hummed behind reinforced doors. Dr. Theodore Bennett waited in the primary server room, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. The 57-year-old MIT PhD specialized in cryptography and wore his exhaustion like a badge of honor. His eyes were red-rimmed behind wire-frame glasses. "Show me." Victoria didn't waste time on pleasantries. Bennett pulled up the access logs on a secondary terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard with caffeinated precision. "They hit something called Shadow Archive. Your father's personal files encrypted with military-grade algorithms I've never seen before. I didn't even know this directory existed until the access triggered our new security protocols. Can you open it? Eventually. But whoever designed this encryption knew what they were doing. It'll take days, maybe a week, to crack without the original keys." Garrett moved closer to the screen, studying the access patterns with an intensity that made Victoria's instincts prickle. He wasn't just observing, he was analyzing, processing, running calculations that had nothing to do with cleaning supplies or building maintenance. What files did they access? His question was direct, professional. The kind of question someone with operational experience would ask. Bennett glanced at Victoria, seeking permission. She nodded. "Something called Project Valkyrie and a directory labeled Client Network. Both are encrypted separately from the main archive. Whoever broke in knew exactly what they were looking for." The name meant nothing to Victoria. Her father had run dozens of classified projects. Valkyrie could have been anything from satellite systems to drone guidance technology. But the way Garrett had gone absolutely still suggested it meant something to him. "James, I want full background checks on everyone with server room access, and I want this building locked down until we figure out how someone accessed my father's personal codes." Victoria turned to Bennett. "How fast can you break that encryption?" 72 hours if I work around the clock. Maybe faster if I can identify the algorithm's base architecture." "Do it. Whatever you need, you have full authorization." Bennett nodded and turned back to his screens, already lost in the mathematics of breaking military-grade encryption. James pulled out his phone to start the background check process. Victoria stood in the server room's antiseptic light and felt the weight of inherited secrets pressing down on her shoulders. Her father had always been paranoid, always compartmentalized. She'd assumed it was smart business practice in a competitive industry. But standing here at midnight looking at encrypted files she'd never known existed. Victoria started to wonder what Raymond Sterling had really been protecting, and whether his death 6 months ago had been as natural as the coroner's report claimed. 3 days passed before Bennett broke through. Victoria spent 72 hours running Sterling Defense while privately investigating her own company. Every board member's history, every classified contract, every financial transaction that might explain who wanted access to her father's encrypted files badly enough to risk exposure. She found nothing, or rather she found too much connections that went nowhere, payments that could be explained multiple ways, relationships that might mean anything or nothing. Her father had built a labyrinth and she was stuck trying to map it without a guide. Garrett vanished during those 3 days. Not literally, he still came home, still read to Lily, still maintained their careful domestic routine. But there was a distance to him, an abstraction, like part of his attention had been pulled somewhere else. Victoria caught him twice with that ancient Nokia, having conversations in low tones that stopped the moment she entered the room. She didn't ask. Their arrangement didn't include interrogation rights. But the not asking was starting to feel like willful blindness. On Friday night, Bennett called. His voice carried exhausted triumph. "I'm in." Victoria was at the office in 15 minutes. Garrett followed without being asked, and this time she didn't question why. They'd crossed some invisible threshold during the security breach. The pretense of separation no longer served whatever strange alliance they'd built. Bennett had transformed the server room into a makeshift command center. Multiple screens showed cascading data, financial records, technical specifications for systems Victoria didn't recognize, and at the center of it all, a simple list of names. Project Valkyrie. Bennett's voice shook slightly. "It's not a weapons system. It's a client list. Everyone your father sold Valkyrie technology to. Every organization that's using his systems right now. Every government official who took money to look the other way." Victoria felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Not literally, but the sensation was real enough, the vertigo of discovering that everything she thought she knew was built on foundations of sand. How damning. Pentagon officials, senators, foreign intelligence services, private military contractors operating in places the U.S. officially doesn't go. Transactions showing money moving through accounts that shouldn't exist, payments for operations that never happened. Bennett pulled off his glasses, rubbed his eyes. If this goes public, it won't just destroy Sterling Defense. It'll trigger investigations that reach into the highest levels of government. People will go to prison. Others will probably die trying to make sure that doesn't happen. The server room's hum felt suddenly oppressive. Victoria looked at the names scrolling across screens, some she recognized, many she didn't. Each one represented power, influence, the kind of connections that could destroy careers or end lives depending on how they were used. "There's more." Bennett pulled up another directory. "Dead Man's Switch. I set it up 3 hours ago. If I die, if my heart stops for more than 72 hours, the system automatically sends everything to 15 major news organizations. New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, BBC. Why?" Victoria's voice came out sharper than intended. "Because I'm a mathematician, not a soldier. I needed them scared of killing me more than leaving me alive." It was brutally logical. It was also exactly the kind of thing that got people killed before they could implement their clever safeguards. Garrett moved closer to the screens, his attention fixed on something Victoria couldn't identify. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, carrying an undercurrent of something that might have been recognition or dread. "What exactly is Valkyrie? Not the client list, the system itself." Bennett hesitated, looking to Victoria for permission. She nodded, past caring about protocol. Whatever Garrett was, whoever he'd been before their arrangement, he clearly understood things about this situation that she didn't. Autonomous AI surveillance and targeting system. Analyzes data from cameras, phone, metadata, social media, financial transactions. Identifies targets based on pattern analysis, then plans elimination protocols that make deaths look natural. Heart attacks, accidents, suicides, disease. It's been deployed in 17 countries, mostly without proper authorization. The words hung in the antiseptic air. Victoria tried to process what she was hearing. Her father had built an assassination system, sold it to anyone willing to pay, created technology that could kill people while maintaining plausible deniability. She'd known Raymond Sterling was complicated. She'd suspected his business practices skirted ethical lines. But this crossed from gray area into something actively evil. How many? Her voice sounded distant in her own ears. 847 operations logged over 4 years, 23 confirmed eliminations, budget of $4.7 billion through offshore accounts. The numbers were too large to comprehend. Victoria focused on breathing in out steady rhythm that kept the panic at bay. Her father hadn't just bent rules, he'd shattered them, monetized murder, built an empire on technology that turned killing into algorithm. We destroy it. The words came out flat, certain. All of it. The files, the client list, the system. We shut down Valkyrie and we make sure no one can ever know. Garrett's interruption was quiet but absolute. Victoria turned to stare at him. Excuse me. Destroying it accomplishes nothing except creating a power vacuum someone worse will fill. His gray eyes met hers, and for the first time since their wedding, Victoria saw him clearly. Not the careful janitor, not the convenient husband, but something harder and infinitely more dangerous. You need leverage. Use the client list to force shutdowns to negotiate. Reform instead of destruction. You sound like you've done this before. Yes. No elaboration, no explanation, just acknowledgement that landed like a confession. Bennett looked between them, confusion evident. James Fletcher had gone very still, his hand resting near his service weapon, with the unconscious readiness of someone who suddenly wasn't sure which side of a situation he was on. Victoria made a decision that would have seemed insane if she'd examined it too closely. But something about the way Garrett spoke, tactical, experienced, carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly what kind of war they were facing, made her trust him in ways the marriage certificate never had. All right, we use it as leverage, but I need to know. She stopped, shook her head. No. First we need to figure out who tried to access these files. Who knows about Valkyrie? Who's desperate enough to risk breaking into my father's encrypted archive? The answer came faster than any of them expected. James Fletcher's phone lit up with an alert from building security. His face went pale as he read the message. We have a situation. Armed intrusion, main lobby, multiple hostiles, they're coming up. The lights in the server room flickered once, then went out. Emergency power kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing everything in red, and in that crimson glow, Victoria watched Garrett Brennan transform. The careful slump disappeared from his shoulders. The apologetic uncertainty vanished from his posture. He moved toward James with predatory efficiency, taking the security chief's weapon before the older man could object. How many? How many hostiles? Garrett's voice carried command authority that brooked no argument. What's their equipment level? Where's the nearest defensible position? James stared at this stranger wearing his co-worker's face. Victoria felt the same disorientation, like watching a mask peel away to reveal something that had been hiding underneath all along. 4, maybe 6 military-grade weapons, professional tactics. They're clearing floor by floor, heading for the server room. Garrett checked the pistol's magazine with practiced efficiency, then looked at Victoria with eyes that had gone absolutely cold. Where's your father's old office? 45th floor. Why? It'll have a panic room. Bunker from Cold War paranoia. That's where we go. Now! He was already moving, shepherding Bennett and James toward the door. Victoria followed, mind racing through questions that had no time for answers. Because whoever Garrett Brennan really was, whatever he'd been before becoming the quiet maintenance worker she'd married for convenience, one thing was absolutely clear. He was someone who knew exactly how to fight, and that knowledge was about to become the only thing standing between Victoria and whoever wanted her father's secrets badly enough to kill for them. The game had changed. The careful distance they'd maintained, the polite fiction of their arrangement, all of it shattered in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Victoria had married a ghost, and now that ghost was the only reason she might survive the night, The safe house sat 30 miles outside Manhattan, buried in Virginia suburbs that specialized in anonymity. Dawn broke through unfamiliar windows as Victoria stood watching Garrett clean his weapons at the kitchen table. The Sig Sauer came apart in his hands with mechanical efficiency slide barrel spring frame, each piece laid out with the precision of ritual. She'd slept maybe 90 minutes. The adrenaline crash after their escape had hit hard around 3 a.m., leaving her shaking in a bedroom that smelled like military-issue bedding and old coffee. Now the sun painted everything gold and normal, as if armed men hadn't tried to kill them 6 hours ago. Garrett's hands moved without conscious thought, wiping down components with an oil-soaked cloth. His gray eyes were distant, fixed on something Victoria couldn't see. Memories, probably. Or calculations about what came next. "How many people have you killed?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Garrett's hands paused for exactly 2 seconds, then resumed their work. "I stopped counting after 50. By the time I got out, the number was well into triple digits." His voice carried no emotion, just facts delivered with the same neutrality he might use to discuss weather or traffic patterns. Victoria felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear exactly, but a recalibration of reality. She'd married a man who killed people the way other men filed taxes or mowed lawns, as a job, as a skill set. Most of them deserved it. Terrorists, arms dealers, men planning attacks on civilians. Garrett reassembled the pistol, his movements swift and sure. But some were just inconvenient. Witnesses who knew too much, analysts asking the wrong questions. By the time I realized what I'd become, it was too late to be anyone else. The confession hung between them like smoke. Victoria moved to the coffee pot. Someone had brewed it strong enough to strip paint and poured 2 cups. She pushed one across the table toward Garrett, then wrapped her hands around her own mug's warmth. "Your wife, Lily's mother. That wasn't an accident in Brussels, was it? Anna." He spoke her name carefully, like handling something fragile. CIA analyst working the Syria desk. "We met in 2015 at Langley. Married fast because we both understood classified lives don't wait for normal courtship. Lily came in 2017. Garrett set the pistol down, picked up his coffee. "Anna died in 2020. BMW hit a concrete pillar at 80 miles per hour on a straight road. Coroner ruled it driver error, but Anna was the best driver I knew. She'd done evasive training, tactical pursuit courses. She didn't just lose control. They killed her because you were investigating Valkyrie. They killed her because I asked questions about where the money was going. Who was really controlling deployment decisions? Anna had access to financial intelligence I didn't. Together we were starting to map the network." His jaw tightened. 3 days after she told me she'd found something big, she was dead. I got the message, so I became someone else. Victoria understood survival. She'd spent 6 months navigating her father's legacy, discovering that Raymond Sterling's empire was built on foundations she didn't want to examine too closely. But Garrett's survival had required erasing himself completely, becoming invisible, trading identity for safety in a world that wanted him dead. "You can't sleep." It wasn't a question. Garrett met her eyes, and for the first time since their wedding, she saw the exhaustion underneath the tactical competence, the weight of carrying bodies on his conscience. "Every time I close my eyes, I see faces, not the targets they made their choices, but the collateral. The people who got caught in blast radius because the mission mattered more than precision." He paused. "There was a boy in Kandahar, 9 years old, wrong place, wrong time. I didn't pull that trigger, but I was there. I let it happen because the target was priority 1. Victoria had spent her adult life in boardrooms where decisions affected thousands of jobs, billions in contracts, families who'd never know her name. She understood the mathematics of acceptable losses, but there was a difference between economic impact and watching a child die for strategic advantage. "You think I should be afraid of you? I think you'd be smart to be. I'm terrified." The admission came easier than expected. "But I also see a man trying to be better than what he was. That's the person I choose to trust, not the ghost. The father reading bedtime stories, the husband who makes coffee the way I like it, even though our arrangement never required you to pay attention. Garrett's expression shifted surprise, then something warmer that he quickly buried. Before either could say more, footsteps announced Dr. Bennett's arrival. The cryptographer looked worse than yesterday, if that was possible. His hair stood at angles that suggested he'd been running his hands through it for hours. I've been analyzing the access patterns from the breach. Whoever broke into Shadow Archive knew exactly which files they wanted. They didn't browse, didn't search. Went straight to Valkyrie specifications and the client network. Bennett pulled out a tablet, brought up access logs. That level of specificity means they either had inside information or they've done this before. Garrett leaned forward, studying the data with the focus of someone reading tactical maps. His finger traced the timestamp sequence. 18 minutes total. That's long enough to copy everything, but short enough to avoid detection under normal circumstances. Professional data exfiltration. He looked at Victoria. We need to know who wants this information badly enough to risk exposure, and we need leverage before they come at us again. The "we" in that sentence carried weight. Somewhere between the security breach and their escape, Garrett had stopped being the convenient husband and become something closer to partner. Maybe ally. Possibly the only person Victoria could trust in a situation that was spiraling beyond her control. Her phone buzzed, encrypted call from a number she didn't recognize. She answered, put it on speaker. A woman's voice came through, clipped and military precise. "This is Colonel Sarah Hayes. I believe you have something of mine." Garrett went absolutely still. Not the relaxed stillness of before, but combat-ready. His hand moved to the pistol on the table, not quite touching, but ready. "Define something." "Garrett Brennan, call sign Ghost. I sent him to observe you 8 months ago, Mrs. Sterling. Determine if you were continuing your father's criminal enterprise or trying to build something legitimate." Looks like the situation has escalated beyond surveillance. Victoria looked at Garrett, questions piling up faster than she could process. He'd been sent to spy on her. Their meeting, their arrangement, probably their entire marriage. All of it orchestrated by someone pulling strings she couldn't see. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been trying to shut down Valkyrie for 5 years. Your father built something dangerous. Then he had the good sense to try destroying it before he died. Unfortunately, the people profiting from his system decided he was more dangerous dead than alive." Hayes paused. "I'm sending extraction to bring you to a secure facility. We need to discuss options. And Mrs. Sterling, I'm on your side, whether you believe that yet or not." The call ended. Victoria stared at the phone, then at Garrett. The betrayal should have felt sharper. Instead, she just felt tired. How much of our marriage was real? The ceremony was transactional. The paperwork was legitimate. But Lily calling you Mama V, that was real. You reading to her every night, real. The way I started making your coffee without thinking about it, that wasn't part of any mission brief. He stood, moved around the table until he was close enough that Victoria had to look up to meet his eyes. "I was supposed to watch you report back on your activities, confirm you weren't a threat. Instead, I watched you fight with your board. Refuse compromises that would have made your life easier. Stay up until 3 a.m. trying to fix contracts your father poisoned. I watched you become a mother to my daughter, even though our deal never required it." His voice dropped lower. "The assignment stopped mattering months ago. You matter. Lily matters. Whatever comes next, I'm choosing you over orders." Victoria wanted to believe him, desperately. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford when armed men were hunting them and her father's secrets were unraveling faster than she could track. A vehicle pulled into the driveway, armored SUV, government plates. Kate Morgan emerged first, red hair, pulled back, body armor worn with the ease of someone who considered it normal clothing. She scanned the perimeter with professional efficiency before signaling all clear. "Colonel wants you in D.C. by noon. Senator Hale's ready to hear what you've got." Kate's eyes flicked to Garrett. "And Ghost, she says to tell you Michael Winters is on the target list. When this goes public, he's first in line for prosecution." The name landed like a physical blow. Garrett's expression shuddered completely, going from readable to blank in the space between heartbeats. Victoria filed the reaction away for later examination. They had 30 minutes to pack, eat, and prepare for whatever came next. Victoria used the time to call her assistant spin a story about emergency board meetings that would keep Sterling Defense running in her absence. Dr. Bennett loaded his encrypted files onto backup drives, paranoid enough to create redundancies of redundancies. And Garrett disappeared for 5 minutes, making a call on that ancient Nokia to someone he didn't name. When they loaded into the SUV heading south toward Washington, Victoria found herself sitting next to the man she'd married for convenience. The arrangement had dissolved somewhere between gunfire and dawn. Now they were something else, partners possibly. Allies, certainly. Two people trapped in a war neither had started, but both were determined to finish. The question was whether they'd survive long enough to see the ending. Washington rose in the distance, all white marble and monuments to power. Victoria had testified before Congress twice, both times during confirmation hearings for defense contracts. She knew how to navigate political theater, how to answer questions with careful precision that gave away nothing important. But this testimony would be different. This time she'd be accusing senators, generals, intelligence officials of crimes that carried life sentences, making enemies of people powerful enough to make her disappear. Garrett's hand found hers in the space between seats. The touch was brief, almost hesitant, but it carried weight. Solidarity promised the unspoken commitment of someone who'd chosen a side. Victoria squeezed back, then released him. Let the world see them as business partners, convenient spouses, whatever fiction served their purposes. But between them, something had shifted. The marriage might have started as transaction, but it was becoming something that felt dangerously like truth. The safe house in D.C. was larger, better equipped, tucked into Georgetown, with the kind of anonymity that came from looking exactly like every other expensive row house on the block. Colonel Hayes waited in the living room, 50 years old, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen everything twice. She wore civilian clothes, but carried herself with unmistakable military bearing. "Mrs. Sterling, good to finally meet you properly." Hayes gestured to the sitting area. "We have approximately 6 hours before Senator Hale arrives for preliminary briefing. I suggest we use that time efficiently." Victoria settled into a chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. Garrett positioned himself near the window, casual stance. But Victoria recognized the tactical placement now. He could see both the street and the room's entrance from that position. Old habits from a life she was only beginning to understand. Hayes pulled out a tablet, brought up files that made Victoria's stomach sink. "Project Valkyrie has been active for 6 years. 847 operations. 23 confirmed eliminations, though we suspect the real number is higher. The client list your father compiled includes 73 entities, governments, agencies, private contractors. Some operations were arguably legitimate. Most weren't." Bennett leaned forward, his exhaustion temporarily forgotten. "The system uses AI to analyze surveillance feeds, financial transactions, communication metadata. It identifies patterns that suggest threats to client interests, then generates elimination protocols. Makes deaths look natural: heart attacks, car accidents, suicides. Autopsy proof if done correctly. My father built an assassination machine. Your father built defensive technology that got weaponized beyond its original scope." Hayes's tone carried no judgment, just statement of fact. "Raymond Sterling designed Valkyrie to protect high-value assets in hostile territories, embassies, military bases, critical infrastructure. Somewhere along the way, the clients started using it for political targets, business competitors, inconvenient witnesses." Kate Morgan spoke from her position by the door. "We've been tracking Valkyrie deployments for 3 years. Your father was our inside source. He came to Colonel Hayes in 2023, said he wanted out. Said the system had become everything he'd tried to prevent. We were building a case for congressional oversight when he died." Victoria's breath caught. Her father had been working with military intelligence, trying to shut down his own creation. The heart attack that killed him wasn't a heart attack. Hayes's confirmation was quiet but certain. Polonium-210, trace amounts in his coffee, the kind of poison that mimics cardiac arrest if you don't know to look for it. We suspected but couldn't prove it without raising alarms that would have exposed our investigation. The room tilted slightly. Victoria gripped the chair's arms, forcing herself to breathe through the revelation. Her father hadn't been the villain she'd believed. He'd been a victim. Someone who'd tried to fix his mistakes and died because the people profiting from his work preferred him sent. Garrett moved from his window, crouched beside her chair. His hand found her shoulder. Steady pressure grounding her to something solid while the world rearranged itself around new truth. Who ordered it? We're still mapping the command structure, but the list starts with 3 names: Senator's Chief of Staff, Michael Winters, Pentagon Procurement Officer General Marcus Webb, and CIA Counterintelligence Director Ellen Frost. They form the inner circle. Beyond them. Hayes shook her head. The network's bigger than we initially thought. Some clients are legitimate government officials operating in gray zones. Others are straight-up criminals using Valkyrie for organized crime. Bennett pulled up the client list on his tablet, started walking through names Victoria recognized. Senators she'd met at fundraisers, generals who'd awarded sterling defense contracts. Agency directors who were supposed to protect national security, not subvert it. If we expose all of this publicly, what happens? A chaos. Kate's assessment was blunt. Congressional investigations, criminal prosecutions, diplomatic incidents with allies who were using the system, intelligence operations compromised. It would be satisfying. It would also accomplish nothing except creating power vacuums that worse actors would fill. So what's the alternative? Hayes looked at her directly, measuring something Victoria couldn't identify. Reform. Use the client list as leverage to force systematic shutdown. Restructure sterling defense under independent oversight. Negotiate quiet exits for people willing to cooperate. Resignation, loss of security clearances, permanent gag orders. Prosecute only those who resist. She paused. It's not perfect justice, but it's the kind that might actually change things. Victoria thought about her father, about the empire he'd built on secrets and compromises, about the man who'd apparently died trying to make things right even if it came too late. I want them to face consequences. They will, just not all of them publicly. Some fish are too big to fry without burning down the entire kitchen. It was pragmatic, cynical, exactly the kind of compromise Victoria had spent 6 months trying to avoid, but sitting in a Georgetown safe house with evidence of systematic corruption and state-sanctioned murder, idealism felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. What do you need from me? Congressional testimony. Closed session with the Senate Intelligence Committee. You present the evidence, explain Valkyrie's capabilities, name the conspirators. Senator Hale provides political cover. We leverage the testimony to force cooperation from the network. Hayes glanced at Garrett. And we need Ghost's operational history. His testimony about Valkyrie's development and deployment will carry weight. Decorated officer classified service record. Harder to dismiss than just corporate malfeasance. Garrett's jaw tightened. Victoria understood the cost Hayes was asking. Exposure meant the end of anonymity. The safety he'd bought by becoming invisible would evaporate the moment he testified before Congress. Michael Winters would know he was alive. Everyone who'd wanted him dead would have confirmation. Lily can't be part of this. She stays protected off the record, completely separate from my testimony. Agreed. We'll establish protective custody under assumed names. As far as anyone knows, Ghost retired and disappeared. His family doesn't exist. Victoria's phone buzzed. Patricia Walsh calling from the Columbus Circle penthouse. She'd left the neighbor watching Lily, promising they'd return within 24 hours. Now that promise felt like dangerous optimism. I need to get my daughter. Garrett's statement wasn't a request. Hayes considered it, then nodded to Kate. Wraith, take him. Extract the child, bring her here. Standard protocols, in and out before anyone notices. Kate pulled keys from her pocket, gestured for Garrett to follow. He looked at Victoria, some question in his eyes. She couldn't quite read. Permission, maybe. or reassurance that she'd still be here when he returned. "Go! Get Lily. We'll handle the rest of the planning." He left without another word, moving with the purposeful efficiency of someone who'd done extractions 100 times before. The door closed and Victoria was alone with Hayes Bennett and the weight of decisions that would determine whether they survived the next week. "Your husband is one of the most dangerous men I've ever commanded." Hayes's tone carried something between respect and wariness. "But he's also one of the few I'd trust in a situation like this. He'll protect that child with his life, and based on what I've observed, he's extended that protection to include you." Victoria thought about Garrett cleaning weapons at dawn, about his confession of body counts and moral compromises, about the way he'd positioned himself between her and danger without hesitation or calculation of cost. He's better than he thinks he is. Most of them are. The ones who carry the weight, who can't sleep at night, who count faces in the dark. They're the ones trying to be better than what the job made them. Hayes pulled up a new file. "Now let's discuss what happens when you testify. Because the people we're targeting won't go quietly, and they have resources that make last night's assault look like amateur hour." The next 3 hours were a crash course in congressional testimony strategy. How to present evidence without revealing sources. How to answer hostile questions from senators who were either implicated or protecting colleagues. How to maintain composure when accused of fabrication, political motivation, or worse. Bennett walked through Valkyrie's technical specifications in terms that were clear enough to be understood but vague enough to prevent replication. Victoria memorized client names, transaction dates, operational details that would form the foundation of her testimony. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if Garrett would actually come back. If the smart move wouldn't be to take Lily and disappear into the network of false identities and offshore accounts that someone with his skills could certainly access. But when the door opened 2 hours later, he stood there with Lily's hand in his. The girl looked tired but unharmed, clutching a worn teddy bear and wearing pink sneakers that lit up with each step. "Daddy said we're having an adventure." Lily's voice carried the kind of excitement only 6-year-olds could maintain through upheaval. Like camping, but in a fancy house. Victoria felt something in her chest, loose in relief maybe, or the validation of trust she'd gambled everything on. Garrett met her eyes across the room and the message was clear. He'd chosen to come back, chosen partnership over self-preservation, chosen whatever this was between them over the safety of staying invisible. Lily spotted Victoria and launched herself across the room. "Mama V, are you having an adventure too?" The nickname felt different now, less like play acting and more like truth they'd accidentally created. Victoria caught the child, lifted her with strength she didn't know she had. "Yes, sweetheart. We're all having an adventure together, as a family." Garrett's expression shifted, something vulnerable breaking through the tactical mask. Kate Morgan watched the interaction with visible surprise, as if seeing something that didn't fit her expectations of Ghost and his operational profile. Hayes simply nodded like she'd confirmed a hypothesis. "Lily, I'm Colonel Hayes. We're going to make sure you and your daddy stay safe. That sound good?" Lily nodded solemnly, then whispered to Victoria, "Is she a real colonel like in the army?" "Yes, a very important one." "Cool." The simplicity of childhood cut through tension like a knife. They had approximately 4 hours before Senator Hale arrived. 4 hours to finalize strategy, prepare testimony, and steel themselves for the war that would begin the moment Victoria spoke her father's secrets into congressional record. Bennett ordered food Thai delivery that arrived in unmarked containers. They ate in shifts, someone always watching the street, maintaining security protocols that had become second nature to the military personnel and felt alien to Victoria's civilian instincts. Garrett fed Lily, got her settled in one of the upstairs bedrooms with her teddy bear and a tablet loaded with cartoons. He came back down looking older than his 35 years. Exhaustion finally catching up to the adrenaline that had carried him through the past day. "She doesn't understand why we're here, just thinks it's an adventure. Better that way." Victoria had no experience with children beyond 3 months of reading bedtime stories, but even she understood the mercy of ignorance. Let her have the fantasy while she can. When this is over, when we testify and the investigations start and media descends, she's going to have questions about who I was, what I did. Garrett's voice was rough. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that her father killed people for a living? You tell her the truth when she's old enough to understand it. You tell her that you made mistakes, carried burdens too heavy for one person, and you're trying every day to be better than you were. Victoria moved closer. And you tell her that you protected people, that you chose to do something hard when it mattered. Children understand heroism. The complexity comes later. He looked at her like she'd said something profound instead of just common sense distilled through desperation. You're good at this. The parent thing. Better than you give yourself credit for. I'm improvising. Lily makes it easy because she's already decided I'm part of her family. I'm just trying not to disappoint her. You won't. The certainty in his voice was startling. Victoria had spent her adult life in environments where trust was conditional and loyalty came with price tags. Garrett offered both without apparent calculation, as if choosing to believe in her was simpler than the alternative. Senator Rebecca Hale arrived exactly on schedule 60 minutes before sunset. The Texas Republican carried herself like someone who'd spent decades in political trenches and emerged with her principles mostly intact. She wore a navy suit and sensible heels. Her gray hair cut short and efficient. Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Brennan, I've read the preliminary briefs Colonel Hayes provided. She settled into a chair, accepted the coffee Kate offered. This is going to be ugly. Senators don't like investigating other senators. The Intelligence Committee especially doesn't appreciate civilian testimony about classified programs. You'll face hostility from members who are either implicated or protecting colleagues. I understand. I'm not sure you do. Hale's tone was gentle but firm. Some of these people have been in power longer than you've been alive. They have connections that reach into every agency, every court, every media organization. When you name them, you're not just making accusations. You're declaring war. Victoria thought about her father, about Anna Brennan dead in Brussels, about every person who'd died because Valkyrie existed and people with power decided elimination was easier than accountability. Then we make it a war they can't win. Hale smiled, grim satisfaction mixed with respect. Good, because half measures won't work here. We go all in or we don't go at all. She pulled out her tablet. I'm recommending closed session testimony. Limits the audience to committee members and cleared staff. We control the narrative that way, release information strategically rather than letting media turn it into circus. When? Day after tomorrow. Gives me time to brief committee leadership, establish ground rules, make sure we have procedural protections in place. Hale looked at Garrett. Your service record will be entered into evidence, partially declassified. The committee needs to understand your credibility. Former JSOC officer, 15 years of classified operations, direct involvement in Valkyrie's development, that carries weight. Garrett nodded, his expression unreadable. Victoria wondered what it cost him, this exposure, this systematic dismantling of the anonymity that had kept him alive. But he didn't protest, didn't ask for alternatives. Just accepted the price of doing what needed to be done. They spent the evening in final preparation. Hale walked Victoria through likely questions, teaching her how to answer with precision that gave away information without compromising operational security. Bennett prepared technical documentation that would support their claims without enabling replication. And Garrett submitted to extensive debriefing with Hayes, providing operational details about Valkyrie deployments he'd witnessed or participated in. His voice remained flat throughout, reciting coordinates and casualty counts with the detachment of someone reading weather reports. Victoria listened from the next room, hearing the man she'd married describe missions that sounded like fiction, but carried the terrible weight of truth. Kandahar, Mogadishu, Damascus suburbs, places where the rules of engagement blurred into moral gray zones and victory meant minimizing bodies instead of avoiding them entirely. Around 10 p.m., Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, I can't sleep. Too many new sounds. Garrett stood, immediately moved to his daughter with the kind of instant attention that revealed priorities. But Lily looked past him to Victoria. "Will you read me a story, the Wild Things book?" "I don't think we have that book here, sweetheart." "That's okay. You can tell me one. You're good at making things sound interesting." Victoria glanced at Garrett, seeking permission or direction. He simply nodded, trust implicit in the gesture. So she climbed the stairs, settled on the edge of Lily's temporary bed, and improvised a story about a girl who went on adventures and discovered that family was something you built rather than something you were born into. Lily fell asleep before the ending, her hand curled around Victoria's like an anchor. For a long moment, Victoria just sat there in the dim room, watching this child breathe and feeling the weight of responsibility she'd never asked for, but somehow accepted anyway. When she came back downstairs, Garrett was alone on the back patio. The others had dispersed to various rooms, seeking sleep before tomorrow's preparations resumed. Victoria joined him in the cool night air, the city lights of D.C. spreading in the distance like earthbound stars. "She loves you. You know that, right?" His voice was quiet. "Not because of any arrangement or transaction. Just because you showed up when she needed someone and you kept showing up. I love her too. Didn't mean to, wasn't planning on it, but she's easy to love." Garrett turned to face her fully, and in the patio's soft light, Victoria saw past the tactical competence to something more vulnerable underneath. "When this is over, when we testify and the investigations start, and whatever happens next happens, what do you want? Real answer." Victoria considered lying, offering the safe response about focusing on business and reform. But Garrett had given her honesty about body counts and broken marriages. She owed him the same. "I want mornings where Lily helps make pancakes. I want to go to work knowing you're here with her, keeping her safe and probably teaching her things 6-year-olds shouldn't know about tactical awareness." She paused. "I want boring and normal and real, with you, with her, as an actual family instead of a convenient arrangement. Even knowing what I've done, what I'm capable of, especially knowing that, because it means redemption is possible. For you, for my father, for all of us carrying weights we can't put down." Victoria moved closer. "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to keep trying to be better. That's enough." Garrett kissed her, then not the brief formal touch of their wedding, but something genuine and vulnerable. A promise made without words, a commitment that felt more binding than any contract they'd signed. When they broke apart, Hayes was standing in the doorway. Her expression suggested she'd witnessed the entire exchange. "Tomorrow we prep, day after you testify, and then everything changes." She met Victoria's eyes. "Are you ready for that?" Victoria thought about her father dying from poisoned coffee, about Anna Brennan's car hitting concrete at 80 miles per hour, about all the people who'd paid for challenging the system that Valkyrie represented. "No, but we're doing it anyway." Hayes nodded, satisfied with the answer. Because readiness was a myth. You just moved forward and hoped competence could substitute for confidence. The night stretched long and restless. Victoria slept in fits, waking every hour to check her phone to verify the plan was still intact. Garrett stayed close, his presence a steady reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. And in the morning, when sun broke through Georgetown windows, they began the final preparations for testimony that would either save them or destroy everything they were trying to build. The war was coming. They'd chosen their side. Now they just had to survive what came next. The Senate Intelligence Committee chamber felt smaller than Victoria expected. 16 seats arranged in a semicircle, wood paneling that absorbed sound and confidence in equal measure. Security had swept her twice before allowing entry, metal detector bag search, electronic device confiscation. Her phone sat in a locker 3 floors down, severing her connection to the outside world. Senator Hale occupied the center chair, flanked by colleagues whose expressions ranged from curious to hostile. Victoria recognized 3 names from Bennett's client list. They sat there wearing suits and American flag pins, acting like public servants while profiting from the system she was about to expose. The gallery was empty except for cleared staff and court reporters. Closed session meant no media, no public record beyond sanitized transcripts that would be released months later with strategic redactions. This testimony would shape investigations, trigger prosecutions, potentially end careers. But it would happen in shadows, the way power always protected itself. Victoria took her seat at the witness table. Garrett sat beside her, wearing a suit that transformed him from maintenance worker into something harder to dismiss. His service record lay in sealed envelopes before each senator, 15 years of classified operations commendations that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Expertise that gave his testimony weight. Mrs. Sterling, thank you for appearing before this committee. Hale's voice carried formal courtesy that barely masked tension. You've provided documentation regarding Project Valkyrie and alleged criminal activity involving defense contracting and classified weapons systems. Before we proceed, I need to remind you that false testimony before Congress carries severe penalties. I understand, Senator. Then let's begin. In your own words, explain what Project Valkyrie is and how you came to possess information about it. Victoria had practiced this opening for 2 days. The words came smoothly, now delivered with the kind of clinical precision that kept emotion from compromising credibility. Valkyrie is an autonomous targeting and elimination system developed by Sterling Defense under my father's direction. It uses artificial intelligence to analyze surveillance data, financial transactions, communication patterns, and biometric information to identify targets designated by client organizations. The system then generates protocols for elimination that mimic natural death, cardiac arrest, vehicular accidents, apparent suicides. One senator leaned forward, his expression skeptical. You're describing an assassination program. Those don't exist in American defense contracting. They exist when there's profit in them and no oversight preventing their development. Victoria pulled up the first document on the screen behind her. This is a contract dated March 2019. Between Sterling Defense and a shell company later traced to Saudi intelligence. Payment of $87 million for what the paperwork calls predictive security analytics. The actual deliverable was Valkyrie deployment in Riyadh with target parameters set by the client. Another senator, older, with the kind of face that had learned to hide reactions decades ago. And you're alleging this was criminal activity defense contractors sell to allied nations all the time. They sell weapons that comply with export regulations and congressional oversight. They don't sell systems designed to assassinate dissidents and make it look natural. Victoria advanced to the next slide. This is a transaction log from 2021. Sterling Defense received $134 million from an offshore account traced to Pentagon procurement. The money purchased Valkyrie access for domestic deployment. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Several senators exchanged glances. Hale maintained her neutral expression, but Victoria saw the slight tension in her shoulders. They were crossing the line now, moving from foreign operations into territory that implicated American officials. Garrett's testimony came next. He spoke with military precision, reciting his service history in abbreviated form that conveyed expertise without revealing operational details. When he described his role in Valkyrie's development, his voice stayed flat, emotionless, just facts delivered by someone who'd learned to compartmentalize horror. I was assigned to the project in 2020 as tactical consultant. My job was to evaluate whether the AI could accurately identify legitimate threats versus civilian targets. The short answer is no, it can't. The system identifies patterns, but patterns don't equal intent. People died because an algorithm flagged them as statistically likely threats. A senator from the Armed Services Committee, whose name Victoria recognized from Bennett's files. Surely you're exaggerating. AI systems have error rates, but calling it fundamentally flawed is accurate. Garrett's interruption was quiet but absolute. I watched Valkyrie recommend elimination of a journalist in Karachi because his communication patterns matched those of a suspected arms dealer. He was investigating the arms dealer. The AI couldn't distinguish between hunter and prey. When I reported this to project leadership, I was told acceptable losses were part of any military operation. And who gave you that order? Garrett pulled out a document, handed it to the nearest staffer for distribution. Colonel Sarah Hayes, my commanding officer at the time and the person who initially brought me onto the Valkyrie project. Victoria watched Hayes's name circulate through the committee. Hale's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or concern that a name she trusted had just been implicated. The testimony continued for 3 hours. Victoria presented financial records, technical specifications, operational logs that documented 847 uses of Valkyrie over 6 years. Some were defensible, targeting actual terrorists, preventing real attacks. Most weren't. Political opponents eliminated in allied nations. Business competitors removed for clients willing to pay premium rates. Witnesses silenced before they could testify. And woven through everything, names. Senators who'd taken payments to ignore export violations. Pentagon officials who'd steered contracts towards sterling defense in exchange for kickbacks. Intelligence directors who'd used Valkyrie for personal vendettas while claiming national security justification. The committee took a 15-minute recess at hour 3. Victoria used the bathroom, drank water that tasted like copper, tried to settle her stomach. Garrett found her in the hallway, his presence a steadying force. You're doing well. They're listening. Half of them are calculating how to bury this. The other half are figuring out which colleagues to sacrifice to protect themselves. Victoria leaned against the marble wall. This isn't justice, it's just controlled demolition. Sometimes that's the best you get. The system doesn't like prosecuting itself. But exposure matters. Making them scared matters. Forcing them to choose between cooperation and destruction, that's more than most people achieve. He was right. Victoria had spent 6 months trying to reform her father's company through proper channels, believing rules mattered if you followed them carefully enough. But rules were written by people who benefited from selective enforcement. Real change required leverage, threat, the willingness to burn everything down if cooperation wasn't forthcoming. They returned to the chamber for the afternoon session. Senator Hale had arranged for one additional witness, Lawrence Donovan, testifying via secure video link from protective custody. The VP appeared on screen looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair uncombed, but his testimony was devastating. Donovan named names Victoria's documentation couldn't prove. He described meetings, recorded conversations, payments made through channels designed to avoid detection. His insurance policy, 47 audio files played in excerpts that made several senators visibly pale. Michael Winter's voice came through crystal clear, discussing Anna Brennan's elimination like someone ordering office supplies. Brennan's asking too many questions. Time to retire Ghost permanently. The wife's got access to financial intelligence we can't afford to have analyzed. Clean them both. Garrett's hands clenched on the table. Victoria watched tension radiate through his shoulders, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. But he didn't speak, didn't react beyond that physical tell. Just let the recording play, let Winter's words condemn him in real time. More audio followed. General Marcus Webb authorizing payments for operations that violated international law. Ellen Frost discussing how to manipulate intelligence reports to justify Valkyrie deployments. And running through it all, one voice that appeared more frequently than any other, Sarah Hayes, coordinating everything, ensuring cooperation, threatening exposure to anyone who considered backing out. Victoria felt the floor tilt beneath her. Hayes was the linchpin, the coordinator who'd held the network together, the woman who'd sent Garrett to observe Victoria, who'd offered extraction and protection, who'd promised to help reform the system, who'd been running the criminal enterprise the entire time. Garrett stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud in the chamber's acoustics. Security moved toward him, hands near weapons, but he wasn't attacking, wasn't threatening, just standing there with realization dawning across his face. "Where's Lily?" The question cut through the room's tension. Kate Morgan should have been watching her at the Georgetown safe house, should have maintained security protocols. But something in Garrett's expression suggested he already knew the answer. His phone, confiscated before entering the chamber, was retrieved by security. The moment they handed it back, it lit up with messages. Victoria watched his face go absolutely blank, all emotion draining away to be replaced by something colder than winter. She's gone. Taken from the safe house 90 minutes ago. Professional extraction, no casualties, no witnesses. His voice was utterly controlled. And there's a message. He showed Victoria the screen. Anonymous number, untraceable routing. Kill switch location. 2 hours. Come alone or the child dies. The senators erupted into discussion. Security started making calls, and Victoria felt the world narrow to a single point of focus. Someone had Lily. Someone was using a 6-year-old girl as leverage to force them into a trap. And there was absolutely no question that they were walking into it anyway. Senator Hale called emergency recess, cleared the room except for core personnel. Within 10 minutes, Colonel Hayes appeared not via video link but in person, walking into the chamber with the kind of authority that suggested she'd been nearby the entire time. We have the extraction team mobilizing. They'll have the child's location within 30 minutes. Hayes's voice carried command presence that brooked no argument. Mr. Brennan, you are not going anywhere. This is obviously a trap designed to... I don't care. Garrett's interruption was quiet but absolute. That's my daughter, I'm getting her back. By walking into an ambush where you'll both be killed, that's tactically insane. Then it's a good thing I'm not asking permission. Victoria stepped between them, forcing Hayes to acknowledge her. Where would they take her? Who has resources to breach a military safe house and extract a child in broad daylight? Hayes' expression flickered just for a moment. Something passed across her face that Victoria couldn't quite identify. Then it smoothed back to professional neutrality. Multiple actors could accomplish this. Remnants of the client network, intelligence agencies trying to prevent exposure, private contractors protecting their investments. She pulled out her phone. I'm coordinating with... Garrett's hand shot out, grabbed Hayes' wrist before she could complete the call. His grip looked casual, but Victoria saw the colonel's face tighten with pain. You're coordinating with no one because you're the one who took her. The accusation hung in the air like cordite. Hayes tried to pull away, but Garrett held firm. Kate Morgan moved toward them, hand near her weapon torn between training that said, "Protect your commanding officer," and the growing suspicion that something was catastrophically wrong. That's absurd. Why would I? Because you need leverage, because Donovan's testimony just exposed you as the network's coordinator. Because the kill switch is your last play to regain control before this entire operation collapses. Garrett released her wrist but positioned himself between Hayes and the exit. His body language had shifted completely, no longer the cooperative witness but something that Victoria recognized from the Sterling defense assault. Combat ready, absolutely lethal. Hayes rubbed her wrist, her expression calculating. You have no proof, just paranoid speculation from someone whose judgment is compromised by the fact that you sent me to marry Victoria, that you knew exactly how to manipulate Ghost's protective instincts, that every piece of this operation has been perfectly positioned to give you maximum control. He pulled out his Nokia, showed her something on the screen. And because Kate just confirmed that the extraction team you supposedly mobilized doesn't exist. There are no additional forces, just you running the same game you've run for 6 years. Kate Morgan's hand was on her weapon now, no longer torn but fully committed to one side. She'd drawn on her commanding officer, her stance professional, but her eyes showing the kind of betrayal that came from discovering heroes were human and broken. Colonel, I need you to very carefully put your hands where I can see them. Hayes complied slowly, her expression shifting from authority to something harder to read. Not quite resignation, but a kind of cold satisfaction, like someone who'd expected this moment and had planned accordingly. You're making a mistake. Whatever you think you know. I know you've been running Valkyrie as a private enterprise since Raymond Sterling tried to shut it down. I know you killed him when he wouldn't cooperate, killed Anna when she got too close to the financial trail, killed anyone who threatened the profit stream you'd built. Garrett's voice was controlled fury. And I know you took my daughter because you need the kill switch location before we testify to its existence. Without it, you can't restart the network. With it, you maintain control even if half your clients go down. Hayes smiled cold, calculating the expression of someone who'd already run the tactical assessments and accepted the cost. You're right. About all of it. Valkyrie was Raymond's creation, but it became mine. He built defense technology. I built an empire. Her voice carried no shame, just pragmatic acknowledgement. The world is too chaotic for human judgment, too much emotion, bias, hesitation. Valkyrie removes all that. Perfect decisions based on perfect data. I have prevented more deaths than you'll ever know, stopped attacks before they happened, eliminated threats that would have killed thousands. By murdering people based on statistical probability. By making hard choices you were too weak to make. That's always been your problem, Ghost. You have the skills but not the conviction. You hesitate. You count bodies. You let guilt compromise operational efficiency. Victoria moved closer to Garrett, standing beside him in solidarity that was probably tactically stupid but emotionally necessary. Where's Lily? Hayes's gaze shifted to her, measuring something. Safe, for now, but that status is contingent on cooperation. You have the kill switch location Raymond told you before he died, didn't he? Last conversation, final confession. He couldn't help himself, always needing someone to know how clever he'd been. The guess was accurate enough to land. Victoria's father had called her the night before his death, rambling about mistakes and contingencies. She'd thought it was cardiac medication affecting his cognition, but there'd been coordinates numbers that hadn't made sense at the time, but she'd written down anyway out of habit. He told me numbers, that's all. Numbers that map to a location, probably the original facility where Valkyrie's core systems are housed. Sterling Defense has a bunker under the main building, Cold War paranoia from a previous generation. Hayes's smile widened. Take me there. Show me the kill switch, and I return your daughter alive and unharmed. And then you kill us anyway. Probably. But at least Lily survives. Isn't that worth the sacrifice? The calculus was brutal. Victoria watched Garrett process it, saw him running tactical assessments that weighed his life against his daughter's. She knew what answer he'd reach, the same one any parent would. Death was acceptable if it meant your child lived. But Victoria hadn't spent 6 months fighting her father's legacy just to surrender to someone who'd perfected his worst impulses. We'll take you to the kill switch, but Lily comes with us. Exchange happens at the location, not before. Hayes considered this, then shook her head. No. The child stays as insurance until I have what I need. Then we negotiate her release. Then we have a problem, because I don't trust you to honor any agreement once you have the kill switch. Victoria pulled out her phone. She'd retrieved it during the chaos. But I will give you coordinates. You can verify the location, confirm it matches whatever intelligence you have. When you're satisfied, we meet there. You bring Lily. We show you the kill switch. Everyone walks away. It was a terrible plan, full of holes and assumptions that probably wouldn't hold, but it was the only play they had that didn't involve immediate surrender. Hayes studied them both, then gestured to Kate. Wraith, you're compromised, but I still need operational support. Take them to the location Mrs. Sterling provides. I'll meet you there with the child in 2 hours. If this is deception, if the location is false, the girl dies and you'll spend whatever time you have left knowing you could have saved her. Kate looked between her colonel and the people she'd been ordered to escort. Her weapon was still drawn, but her grip had loosened slightly. Ma'am, I can't. You can and will. That's an order, Captain. The rank usage was pointed. Kate was military first, and orders still carried weight even when the person giving them had been exposed as criminal. She holstered her weapon, her expression showing the kind of conflict that came from loyalty meeting reality. Yes, ma'am. Hayes walked toward the exit, paused at the doorway. 2 hours, Mrs. Sterling. If you're not there, if you've contacted additional authorities, if you've done anything except exactly what I've instructed, your daughter pays the price. She looked at Garrett directly. And you ghost, you've killed for worse reasons than saving your child. I'm counting on that pattern holding. Then she was gone, leaving them in the chamber with Kate Morgan and the wreckage of testimony that would never be completed. Victoria pulled up the numbers her father had given her. They mapped to coordinates under Sterling Defense Tower the bunker Hayes had guessed existed. Her father's paranoia had built layers of security fallback positions, places where critical systems could survive even if the company above ground burned. It's real. The location, the bunker. My father showed me once when I was 16, made me memorize the access codes in case something happened to him. She'd thought it was paranoid overreaction at the time. Now it felt like providence. Garrett checked his weapons, the pistol he'd been allowed to keep for the testimony, a knife in an ankle sheath that security had somehow missed. Not enough firepower for a real assault, but better than nothing. Kate, whose side are you on? The question was direct, demanding clarity in a situation where ambiguity could get them killed. I don't know. Her honesty was brutal. Colonel Hayes trained me, gave me opportunities I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. But if she's been running Valkyrie as criminal enterprise, if she murdered your wife... Kate's voice trailed off. I need to see proof, real evidence, not just accusations. Fair enough. Come with us. When Hayes shows up with Lily, you'll have your proof. They left the Senate building through a side entrance, avoiding the media that had started gathering after rumors leaked about the closed testimony. Kate drove armored SUV that probably belonged to some classified motor pool. The route to Sterling Defense Tower took them through downtown D.C., past monuments that promised justice and equality, while power operated in shadows. Victoria sat in the back seat next to Garrett, their shoulders touching in the confined space. Neither spoke. What was there to say? They were driving into a confrontation with someone who'd spent 15 years orchestrating assassination programs. Someone who had Lily and wouldn't hesitate to use a child as leverage. The probability of survival was low. The probability of success even lower. But the alternative was abandoning Lily to Hayes's mercy, and that wasn't actually an alternative at all. Sterling Defense Tower rose above Manhattan like a monument to corporate power. 47 floors of steel and glass housing thousands of employees who had no idea their company had been weaponized. Victoria used her executive access to bypass lobby security, led them to a private elevator that descended instead of rising. The bunker entrance was behind a false wall in the sub-basement, protected by biometric scanners that required her palm print and retinal scan. The door opened onto a stairwell that dropped another 3 levels, ending in a facility that looked like it had been built for nuclear war. Server racks filled the space, black monoliths humming with processing power. Environmental controls maintained precise temperature and humidity. Backup generators ensured power even if the entire city grid failed. And at the center of it all, a terminal that controlled access to Valkyrie's core systems. The kill switch is software, not hardware. It sends a cascade protocol through every deployed Valkyrie unit, simultaneously overwriting the AI with a data corruption sequence that makes the system unsalvageable. Victoria pulled up the interface, showed them the mechanism. My father built it as final insurance. If Valkyrie ever became too dangerous to control, this would end it permanently. Kate studied the setup with professional appreciation. And Hayes needs physical access because remote activation requires codes that died with my father. The system's designed to prevent unauthorized shutdown, can't have clients disabling it when they decide they don't want to pay anymore. Victoria traced the command structure. Only way to activate now is direct terminal access plus administrative override, which I have. Garrett positioned himself near the entrance, watching the corridor they'd descended through. How long until Hayes arrives? 20 minutes, maybe less. She'll want to verify the location before bringing Lily. Victoria pulled out her phone. Should I? No. Garrett's voice was firm. No calls, no alerts, nothing that gives her reason to think we're deviating from instructions. We wait. When she shows up, we negotiate face to face. Kate checked her weapon. Her expression still conflicted, but her stance suggesting she'd made some kind of decision. If the Colonel really is responsible for everything you've described, if she murdered civilians and corrupted Valkyrie for profit, I'll stand with you. But if this is elaborate setup to frame her, if you're lying... She left the thread unfinished. We're not lying. Victoria wished it wasn't true. Wished Hayes really was the dedicated officer trying to reform corrupt systems. But the evidence, the recordings, Donovan's testimony, it all pointed to one conclusion. Hayes had built an empire on her father's technology and would kill anyone who threatened it, including a 6-year-old girl who'd never done anything except exist as leverage. The minutes crawled past. Victoria used the time to familiarize herself with the kill switch interface, mapping the activation sequence so there'd be no fumbling when the moment came. Garrett maintained his watch position absolutely still except for periodic scans of the corridor, and Kate paced, her internal conflict playing out through restless movement. Footsteps echoed down the stairwell, multiple people moving with tactical precision. Garrett's hand moved to his weapon, then stopped. Drawing now would only accelerate confrontation they weren't ready for. Hayes emerged first, Lily walking beside her with the colonel's hand resting on her shoulder. Not violent, not overtly threatening, but the message was clear. The child was hostage, her safety contingent on cooperation. Lily's eyes widened when she saw Garrett. "Daddy!" She tried to run to him, but Hayes's grip tightened. "Not yet, sweetheart. First, the adults need to have a conversation." 4 contractors accompanied Hayes, private security, probably former military, definitely armed and competent. They spread through the bunker with professional efficiency, establishing fields of fire that covered every exit. Victoria felt the tactical situation collapse from bad to catastrophic. They were outgunned, outmanned in a confined space that offered minimal cover. The only advantage they had was position near the kill switch terminal, and that advantage evaporated the moment Hayes had what she came for. "Show me." Hayes's command was simple. Victoria moved to the terminal, pulled up the kill switch interface. The colonel studied it with the focus of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. "Administrative override requires your biometric authentication plus a 16-digit code. What's the code?" "Let Lily go first." Hayes smiled. The expression didn't reach her eyes. "That's not how this works. You give me the code, I verify it activates the sequence, then we discuss the child's release." "Discuss implies negotiation. I want guarantee." "Life doesn't offer guarantees, Mrs. Sterling, just probabilities and acceptable losses." Hayes pulled out her sidearm, not pointing it at anyone, just making its presence clear. "The code, now, or I start with the child and work my way up to people you care about more." Garrett moved, not attacking but positioning himself between Hayes and Lily. One of the contractors tracked him with a rifle, finger on the trigger but not firing yet. "You shoot any of us, you don't get the code. You kill Lily, I guarantee you'll never leave this bunker alive." His voice was absolutely calm. "So how about we try honesty instead of threats? You need the kill switch to maintain control. We need Lily safe. There's a deal somewhere in there." Hayes considered this, then holstered her weapon. "Fine. Honesty. Valkyrie represents $4.7 billion in revenue over 6 years. It's prevented 17 major terrorist attacks, eliminated 43 high-value targets, who would have destabilized regions if left alive, and provided capabilities that official channels couldn't authorize." Her voice carried conviction that bordered on zealotry. "Raymond Sterling built something extraordinary. I perfected it. And yes, some people died who shouldn't have. Acceptable losses in service of greater good. You killed Anna." Garrett's statement was flat. She was investigating financial irregularities, not operational security. She wasn't a threat to national security, just to your profit margin. Your wife was an analyst who'd mapped 40% of my offshore network. Another month and she'd have traced everything back to source accounts that would have exposed the entire operation. Hayes's expression showed no remorse. "She made a choice to dig too deep. That has consequences. She made a choice to do her job. You made a choice to murder her for it. Yes, just like I made a choice to eliminate Raymond when he developed conscience at the worst possible time. Just like I'll make a choice about what happens to all of you once I have control of the kill switch." The honest confession was somehow worse than evasion would have been. Hayes wasn't hiding behind justification or rationalization. She'd simply decided that maintaining Valkyrie's operation justified any cost. and she'd stopped counting bodies somewhere around victim number 10. Victoria had spent 6 months trying to reform her father's legacy. But looking at Hayes at the ultimate expression of what sterling defense could become, when completely untethered from ethics, she realized reform wasn't enough. Some things needed to burn completely before you could build something better. The code is 2847-9163-5729-0184. She delivered it clearly, watching Hayes input the sequence with careful precision. The terminal accepted it, brought up the kill switch activation screen. One more command and Valkyrie would cease to exist in all deployed locations simultaneously. Hayes studied the interface, verifying it was legitimate. When she looked up, satisfaction filled her expression. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling. You've been remarkably cooperative." She gestured to one of the contractors. "Secure them." The contractor moved toward Victoria. Garrett intercepted his movement, blurring fast. The fight was brief, brutal trained operator versus someone who'd spent 15 years learning to kill efficiently. The contractor went down hard, his rifle clattering across the concrete floor. Chaos erupted. The remaining contractors opened fire, forcing Garrett and Victoria behind server racks that offered minimal protection. Kate pulled her weapon, caught between training and betrayal, finally making her choice. By shooting at the contractor nearest to Hayes, the shot went wide intentionally or not, Victoria couldn't tell. But it declared sides, made Kate's position clear. Hayes grabbed Lily, used the child as shield while backing toward the exit. Her weapon was out now, tracking targets with professional efficiency. "You just sacrificed this child for principles. Hope it was worth it." Garrett moved, no longer defensive, but attacking with the kind of focused violence that came from 15 years of classified operations. He crossed the open space in 3 strides, ignoring the gunfire that ripped past him. His hand caught Hayes's wrist, twisted the weapon, falling as bone cracked. They fought like mirror images, same training, same tactical schooling, decades of institutional knowledge applied to the problem of killing each other quickly. But Garrett had one advantage Hayes didn't. He was fighting for his daughter's life. That mattered more than skill or experience or comparative body counts. He got his hands on her throat, squeezed with lethal intent. Hayes's eyes widened, her free hand scrabbling for anything that might tip the balance. For a moment, Victoria thought he'd actually do it, kill his former commanding officer right there in a bunker that already held too many ghosts. Then Lily's voice cut through the violence. "Daddy, stop! You're scaring me!" Garrett froze. The hesitation that had always been his weakness, the humanity that Hayes had spent years trying to train out of him. He couldn't become the monster completely, not with his daughter watching. Kate took the shot clean through Hayes's shoulder, enough to disable without killing. The colonel dropped, blood spreading across her uniform. 2 contractors were down, the others retreating up the stairwell rather than die in a bunker for a paycheck that wouldn't matter if they were dead. Garrett pulled Lily into his arms, his whole body shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline and violence. The child clung to him, crying but physically unharmed. Victoria moved to them, completed the embrace that made them family instead of convenient arrangement. Kate kept her weapon trained on Hayes while calling for backup, real backup this time, not manufactured rescue. Her voice was controlled, but Victoria heard the tremor underneath. She'd just shot her commanding officer, chosen principle over loyalty. That kind of decision left scars regardless of tactical necessity. Hayes laughed, the sound wet with pain and something that might have been genuine amusement. "You think this changes anything? The network's bigger than me. Valkyrie's just technology. Someone else will build it, sell it, profit from it. You've won nothing except buying time. Time's all anyone gets." Garrett's voice was rough. "What we do with it matters." Victoria moved to the terminal, pulled up the kill switch sequence. Her hands hovered over the activation command, one button press, and Valkyrie ceased to exist. All deployed units, all client access, all the infrastructure her father had built and Hayes had corrupted. Gone. But also gone would be the evidence they needed to prosecute the network. The operational logs, the client communications, the proof of systematic murder committed by people who'd sworn oaths to protect and defend. If I activate this, we lose leverage. Activate it anyway. Garrett met her eyes across the bunker. Some things are worth more than tactical advantage. Sleep at night. Looking at ourselves without shame, knowing we chose right over expedient. His words carried weight earned through 100+ bodies and a wife dead in Brussels and 15 years of doing things he couldn't take back. If anyone had earned the right to choose principles over pragmatism, it was him. Victoria pressed the button. The terminal showed Cascade Protocol initiating data corruption spreading through every Valkyrie deployment worldwide. In 17 countries, systems that had been analyzing targeting, eliminating people based on algorithmic decision-making suddenly became inert metal and worthless code. $4.7 billion of criminal enterprise ceased to exist. Hayes's empire crumbled to nothing in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. Federal agents, military police people with credentials that suggested they actually had authority to arrest a sitting colonel for treason and murder. They secured the bunker, took Hayes into custody, gathered evidence that would fuel investigations for years. Senator Hale appeared personally, her expression showing the kind of grim satisfaction that came from being proven right about corruption she'd suspected but couldn't prove until Victoria handed her the ammunition. The committee will reconvene tomorrow. With Colonel Hayes in custody and the evidence you've provided, we can proceed with systematic prosecution. She looked at Garrett. Your testimony will be central to building cases against the remaining network members. I know you wanted to stay invisible, but I'll testify under my real name with full disclosure of service record. He held Lily closer. Hiding's over. Time to face whatever comes next. The next months were chaos. Congressional investigations, criminal prosecutions, media circuses that turned sterling defense into shorthand for defense industry corruption. Victoria spent 16-hour days working with federal investigators, restructuring the company under oversight so strict it sometimes felt suffocating, fighting to preserve jobs while dismantling the apparatus that had enabled Valkyrie's creation. Garrett testified before 3 separate committees. His face appeared on news broadcasts, his service record partially declassified to establish credibility. The anonymity that had kept him alive evaporated, but threats never materialized. Turns out exposing systematic criminal enterprise made you too visible to eliminate quietly, and through it all, Lily attended school, played with friends, remained blissfully ignorant of most details. She knew her father had been a soldier, knew he'd done important work that couldn't be discussed. But the specifics, the body count, the moral compromises, the ghosts that kept him awake at night, those could wait until she was older. 6 months after the testimony, Sterling Defense looked completely different. New board members, new corporate structure, new mission statement that emphasized ethical defense technology over profit maximization. Victoria had lost some shareholders but gained others who actually cared about building something legitimate. The company would survive. Maybe even thrive if she could maintain the balance between commercial viability and moral clarity. She came home one evening to find Garrett cooking dinner, actual cooking, not just heating leftovers. Lily was at the table doing homework, occasionally asking questions about fractions that her father answered with more patience than Victoria could muster after 12 hours of depositions. This was the life she'd accidentally built. Not the arrangement they'd signed, but something earned through violence and testimony and choosing each other when easier options existed. How was work? Garrett glanced up from the pasta he was somehow making from scratch. The usual. Lawyers, investigators, senators who want credit for reform without actually reforming anything. Victoria dropped her bag by the door, moved to hug Lily from behind. But we're winning. Slowly, messily, but winning. Good. The single word carried weight. Garrett had spent 15 years fighting wars that never ended, hunting enemies who were replaced the moment they fell. Having a war that could actually be won, that mattered to him in ways Victoria was still learning to understand. After dinner, after Lily was in bed with her stories and her teddy bear, they stood on the penthouse balcony watching Manhattan light up below them. The city looked peaceful from this height, hiding the 1,000 small wars being fought on streets and in boardrooms and in human hearts. You know we could have taken the deal? Victoria's voice was quiet. Hayes offered to spare Lily in exchange for the code. We could have given it to her negotiated safe passage, disappeared into witness protection or foreign exile. We could have. Garrett's arm settled around her shoulders. But then we'd have been running the rest of our lives, and I'm done running. Even though it put Lily at risk. Especially because it put Lily at risk. I want her to grow up in a world where people like Hayes don't win. Where exposure matters and consequences follow crimes. That's worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Victoria leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of someone who'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been safer. They'd started as transaction convenient arrangement to satisfy legal requirements. But somewhere between gunfire and testimony and the decision to activate a kill switch that cost them tactical advantage, they'd become something real. Family. Partnership. Whatever word fit the shape of two people deciding to build something permanent from the wreckage of their father's choices. Behind them, through the penthouse windows, Lily's nightlight glowed steady. A child sleeping safe because adults had chosen principles over expedience. Because her father couldn't become the monster completely. Because Victoria had pressed a button that destroyed billions in criminal assets rather than protect leverage. The world wasn't fixed. Hayes would likely avoid the worst sentences through plea bargains and classified testimony. Some network members would walk free due to lack of admissible evidence. Sterling Defense would spend years rebuilding trust and reputation. But Valkyrie was dead. The assassination program her father created and Hayes perfected had been reduced to corrupted code in 17 countries. That mattered. Small victory in a long war, but victory nonetheless. We made it. Victoria spoke the words like testing their weight. Against odds that should have killed us, we actually made it. We made it, Garrett agreed. Now we just have to figure out what to do with the life we fought for. I have some ideas. Most of them involve boring and normal and waking up next to you for the next several decades. Sounds perfect. They stood there a while longer, watching the city breathe and shift below them. Two people who'd married for convenience, stayed for survival, and discovered somewhere along the way that the best things in life came from choosing each other when every logical reason suggested they shouldn't. The arrangement was over. The marriage remained, and that made all the difference.